In this How-To-Svelte, we're going to create a portfolio gallery with filtering. And if you come on over to w3schools.com and click the How-To link at the top, you'll look for portfolio with filtering, and you'll get this. It's basically a portfolio with pictures and some descriptions and titles. And it's showing all the pictures now because that's the category that we have selected. If I select nature, it only shows nature. Select cars, it only shows cars. People, people. And so to get started, let's click on the Try It Yourself. And we'll grab all of the HTML and CSS and bring it on over. And so what we'll do first is we'll work on the buttons. As you can see, the buttons are all showing here. There's an active class and then a hover class. And what we'll do is we'll take all the button HTML and make a button container component. And when we take a look at the HTML, we can see that there's symmetry between the buttons. And what we're going to do to generate each button is use an array of values that matches each of these category names. But the way we're going to do it is we're going to leave the outer divs here. And instead of filling in what goes in here, what we're going to do is use a slot element, which is kind of a filler element, basically saying that something's going to go in here. I'm not sure what, but what we do know is that the outer divs will surround that. So now the button container itself, if we import that in, you can see it's not working yet, because when you use a slot component like this, we won't use a self-closing tag, but we'll actually use an opening and a closing tag. And now if we go ahead and cut and paste our buttons in that we had before, this is basically our filler content. And so the buttons show up here. But again, we're not going to hard code these. What we're going to do is we're going to make these buttons based off of an array. And why don't we go ahead and just make that array? And so we'll get rid of all of these buttons and we'll just use one as a template. And then we'll loop through these categories. And category itself represents each of these stringed elements. So that's the label of the button, is the category. So we got that showing up. And you can see we're getting a warning down here about a button active class. And if we come down and take a look at that, the active class alters the background color and changes the text to white. So if we were to just hard code in active, you can see the buttons change. Now we don't want to do this yet, but that's what it looks like. But we do know that when a button is clicked, that is when we want this class to be added. So let's go ahead and add that. So it'll be class active, and only do it when a certain condition is true. And we know that when we click the buttons, we're going to be setting a category of sorts. So let's go ahead and just create that variable. We'll call it selected, and we'll set it to a default of all. And so we know we want to add the active class to the button when selected is equal to the category coming in. So add the active class to the button when selected is equal to category. And in this case, we have selected equal to all. And so all is going to match the category all. And that's why only this button has this styling added to it. Let's go ahead and add a little bit of JavaScript here. And we'll also add an HTML attribute called a dataset. And that starts with the word data dash, and then you can name this whatever you want. I'll call it name. So the data name is going to be category. You may, if you haven't used this attribute before, it's a little bit like using an ID. And so now, because we have this data name attribute on each button, if I inspect this tools, you can see each button has got a data name. This one's for all. This data name is set to nature. This one's for cars, for people. And so we can access that attribute in order to help us out with some JavaScript. Because this is a button, of course, we're going to be clicking it. So let's add an onClick, and we'll create a function that we'll just call it filter selection. And up in our script tags, let's go ahead and make that. We'll use the event object. And I'm going to really quickly want to show you what that data attribute looks like. So if we console dir e.target, and then look in Chrome DevTools again. Now if I click nature, we get the button. And all HTML elements come with, a massive amount of properties. If you look through the property, look for the property dataset. There it is. And if I open dataset, you can see it's got a key name, and that name corresponds to this that I put here. You can put whatever name you want there. You can call it monkey if you want. It doesn't matter. But whatever you put here, that's what will show up here in dataset. And then this is the key, and then this is the value. And you saw that I clicked the nature button, and so the value is nature. So we can use this to our advantage. So if we go over to filter selection, what we want to do is set this selected variable to the button that we click. If we click cars, we want to select it to cars. So we'll do e.target.dataset.name, and .name because that's what I set there. We'll get rid of our console dir, and we'll take the selected variable and we'll assign it to e.target.dataset.name. And so now when I click cars, it gets highlighted because this rule we created here, which basically said add the active class when the category matches the value of selected. Good, so we got the buttons working. Now let's go ahead and focus on the gallery. And we'll do the same thing. We'll just go ahead and grab everything here. And let's create a component called gallery. Now we've got all these warning messages here, and we'll deal with those soon enough. But let's take a look at gallery, the HTML. And this is a lot like the button container. We could probably do the same thing we did back here, where we keep the outer div and then just put a slot in the middle there. And again, if we look at our HTML, you can see the symmetry. This div looks a lot like this div, which looks a lot like this div. So that should tell us immediately that this can be something we can use as a template. So let's get rid of everything except one of those. And we'll cut this out. And again, we'll put a slot element in there, which basically is a placeholder. Says something's going to go in there. I'm not sure what, but you define it later, and we will. So let's go over to app, and we'll import gallery. And we'll bring gallery in right here. And again, because we're using a slot element, we can't just do an opening or a self-closing tag. We can't do this, or nothing will show up. Okay, so now we should deal with the content that's going to go inside this template. We're not going to use these images that were at W3 Schools. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a data file here. I'll call it image data. You can do the same, but it's got to be labeled .js instead. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an array, which I call images, and I'm filling it with 9 objects. And each object will represent one of these cards that we see here. And this is the shape of the data. I gave it a name, a URL to the image, a keyword, and you can see I've got 3 keywords that match nature. I've got 3 keywords here that match cars, and then people all match. And so once you have this data object, let's go ahead and export it. And this way we can use it inside of our app component. And you can see again, this is an array. So we're going to loop through that down here inside gallery. Okay, so I fixed a few of these broken URLs up here. That's probably why we weren't seeing some things, so make sure to look at that too. And so let's take a look at some of these rules here that we're missing. So this is looking for a row class. Okay, so we're looping through our images here, and nothing is showing yet because we still have to destructure the data and fill it into the template here. And so instead of just using image, each image is actually one of these objects, so we'll destructure it and use the keys instead. Name, URL, keyword, description. And so the name we'll put for the H4 tag. The description we'll put in the P tags. The URL we'll put here. The alt tag will be the name key. And the reason we can't see anything yet is because the CSS is now actually hiding this. So you can see if we put the class here, let's look down here. There's a class here called show, which will display the element to block. So if we were to add the show class, you can see all the elements show up here. Let me just fix some of the CSS. So good, we have all of the images showing up now. They're all rendering, and that's fine when the button with the value of all is selected. But if I select nature, you can see it's not filtering yet. And so this first example here, this first template we have here is perfect. There's really nothing for us to do. But what we have to do is we have to put this in an if block. And what we want to say is if the selected variable is equal to all, then show what we're seeing right now, which is basically this HTML. But here's where we're going to have to do an else block. Else take this same HTML template and only use the show class. So we'll use some Svelte shorthand here, class, colon, and then the name of the class, which is show. And we only want to add show when some condition is true. And you can see what we're passing in from the data is name, URL, keyword, and description. So it's keyword that we want to focus on. And keyword is nature. Here it's cars. Down here it's people. So when the keyword matches selected, so when keyword is equal to selected, then add the show class only to certain elements. So now here, if we click cars, we only see the cars. If we click nature, we see just nature. People, and then all. Again, here, if we click all, that show class is added to all the divs. In this else block here, we're only adding the show class if this condition is met. And that's how you can take a portfolio gallery and add some filtering to it using Svelte.